Hi everyone, welcome to episode 5 of the Bharat Varta podcast. This is going to be a very interesting foreign policy roundup. So we are now available on iTunes, Stitcher, Anchor.fm, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, and a bunch of other platforms. We'll keep updating you about these on our Twitter handle. So we're going to talk about what the defining features of India's foreign policy has been of late, and also our relationships with a few key neighbors of ours and other entities across the world, such as China, Pakistan, US. Right. So this episode we're joined by Amit, who is a veteran of the IT industry, he's a tech entrepreneur from Pune, and also one of the early Indian voices on Twitter. Hi Amit, how's it going?
Hi Gary, good to be here.
We're also joined by Ashish, also from Pune. You could say there is some sort of bias there, but we're open to it. He's a public policy analyst and author, and is particularly recognized for his views on infrastructure policy and so on. Hi, Ashish. Great to have you back.
Hi, Roshan.
And then finally, we're joined by Rohit, who is a political analyst and a foreign policy commentator as well, known for his pretty outspoken views on pretty much everything on politics, policy, and culture. So great to have you back, Rohit.
Hi Roshan, great to be back.
All right, guys, let's just go around the table. I'd like some opening comments on, what you see as the defining features of India's foreign policy over the last couple of years. Ashish, we'll begin with you.
Sure, Kerry. So, see, if we look back, foreign policy in India has been distinctly Nehruvian in nature. I mean, we credit or discredit the first PM for a lot of stuff. But one thing which certainly he had a big impact on was foreign policy. And in those days, given the stature he had or the respect he commanded, the tenets which he formed lasted in the system, in the political administrative system, for several years, right? So, irrespective of which government was in power, whether it was Congress or other parties, the large defining features were actually the same what India had followed since 1950s. So, foreign policy in the interim has evolved in its characteristic, in the way it is seen by the countries. India started off with a non-aligned view. We didn't want to be part of any of the blocks which existed, early on in the last century, after the Second World War. The change which has happened in the last, let's say, few years is that India is now looking at equal friendship with different parties, even when there are conflicting views, rather than maintaining equal distance from everyone, right? So, for example, we have been courting Israel, and we've also had very good relationships with several of the Middle East countries, the oil bloc countries. So, I think those contradictions we have started to manage more actively. The foreign policy is driven more by India's interests, and because we are such a vast country, our interests are also fairly broad. It's less dogmatic than what used to be, and I think one feature which has got included is on the trade side, which is India has never looked at trade as a great instrument of foreign policy, but we are increasingly looking at that. So I would close the opening remarks by quoting Kissinger, a very hated man in India for his role during during the Bangladesh war. But he had once said that a country which demands moral perfection in its foreign policy usually achieves neither perfection nor the security it desires, right? So I think India has probably acted on some of that thought, where the self-interests rather than a moral positioning or forming blocks becomes more important. I think we stand alone, but we also stand with everyone else. I think that's been the essence of the change in the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I agree with that, right? I think it's moved past beyond, being a schoolyard fight of sorts or some sort of a, moralizing session to actually being able to negotiate from strength rather than weakness, right? So Rohit, I mean, you want to step in next and talk about a few other things?
Yeah, sure, Caddy. So I think one of the points both of you just mentioned about this trend towards moving away from some sort of moralizing, that's something we've seen fairly starkly over the past few months, especially with the whole sort of two big moves that the re-elected Modi government did, which has created some international impact. That is the removal of Article 370 from Kashmir and, of course, the Citizenship Amendment Act and associated stuff. So where bunch of countries seem to have said certain things, come out with certain comments, and you can clearly see that the government is not really interested in addressing them or thinking that this has somewhat impacted India's moral standing. This obviously led to a lot of heartburn in the traditional foreign policy sectors of Indian society. But that's something that's really changed, and in my view, obviously, it's a very welcome change, where the answer to countries who themselves have certain questionable records on a lot of things like Iran or Malaysia or Turkey saying something, the answer really, of course, Dr. Jaishankar's what I would call an iconic line recently at the Economic Times Summit, where he just said that this just showed us who our real friends are, rather than being concerned about what our friends actually said. So that's something that's been a pretty big change, and sort of I think that line sort of defines the foreign policy of India over the last few years. Of course, to be fair, this sort of trend away from moralizing started a while back. You could say with the opening up of relations with Israel in the early 90s. Then, of course, the nuclear test, and how we were able to sort of withstand a lot of diplomatic pressure that came from it. And then even the Indo-US nuclear deal under Dr. Manmohan Singh. So that's another thing where clearly things moved away from some of the older patterns to something new, and I would say that sort of was exemplified by Dr. Jaishankar's recent remark.
Yeah, I mean, he's been at the helm of everything, right? Dr. Jaishankar, also dubbed the Silver Fox. I don't know if anyone's called him that, but hopefully, we're the first right now. So, Amit, you want to come in on that note and talk about him?
Yeah, I think I'll be brief. I agree with what Ashish and Rohit have highlighted. I think specifically going back to what Ashish was saying, clearly for a long time, our foreign policy has carried forward the legacy of what had happened or what was set in the first couple of decades of after our independence, and we are now finally seeing some kind of a departure from that approach, right? And I think it's also being aided by a few things. It's being aided by our economic development. Clearly, we are a much bigger economy on the global stage as compared to what we were a few decades back. So that definitely helps us to some extent. And going back to what Rohit said, I think finally we are realizing that we need to figure out what our goal is when it comes to a specific relationship with a specific country. So we are instead of trying to preach some overarching concept, we are getting more into realpolitik and figuring out what a relationship needs to be with one country or one bloc for our specific gains, or what our country, what India needs for that specific context, right? And then have a similar, complete or maybe completely opposite relationship with another country, right? And many countries in the world in the earlier days have shown this, having completely different relationships and views when dealing with different partners. So we have finally getting to that stage where we can simultaneously, for example, we can have good relationships with the US as well as with Russia, right? For example. So we're trying that. I think we have made some excellent progress, especially in the last year with the current foreign minister. Clearly, Minister Jaishankar has taken some of these things to the next level, and probably we can talk about it later on. A couple of other quick points. We have definitely seen a big change in the last 2 years, or last 7 years, I would say, since the Modi one government came on board, is leveraging the Indian diaspora, right? I mean, this has always been a huge asset for India for a long time, but somehow was never actively used. The Vajpayee government did take some steps in that direction, but again, I think we have taken it to the next level with the kind of outreach that this government has done. And there are some things to learn from other countries, especially a much smaller country like Israel, the way they have been able to use their diaspora in the West. I think that's also something worth exploring and talking further.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's plenty to cover even in this segment, which is the defining features, right? So I'll let you guys come in at this point and add anything that you may think is important. Ashish, you want to pitch in?
Yeah, sure, Roshan. See, just a couple of other additional points. So one is that, see, if you look at traditionally, India has always been, or at least for many years, was hyphenated with Pakistan, right? Because the Western world saw us as like a dual relationship. And if you look at the Pakistan's approach on foreign policy in 70s and 80s, I mean, clearly their economy on a per capita basis was better than ours for several years after the independence. I mean, they actually did a lot of this lobbying and using the diaspora, which Amit alluded to, for very actively for several years. In fact, the lobbying they did with respect to Kashmir, I mean, we are still paying for it in a way. I mean, I think 70 years later, we still haven't fully caught on to that point. I think what has changed in the last few years, one of the which we notice is that the government is now trying to create several Indian motifs, right, which the world can identify with. So, like International Day of Yoga. I mean, it looks like a big jamboree, etc. But then, if you walk the streets of New York or San Francisco, or maybe even in some of the European cities, I mean, the recall which yoga has in the connect with India, I think that kind of builds up a general sense of presence that which we have in those countries. I mean, Gandhi as a motive, again, like a lot of the supporters of the present government don't like the government outreach on Gandhi, but the fact is he's like the most recognized Indian name world over. So in terms of leveraging that asset and using his brand values, which he stood for in the eyes of the world, reflecting that on the Indian foreign policy and conduct with respect to non-violence and being fair in our dealings, etc. I think some of that, I think government has tried to paint a broader picture there as well in the last few years. Again, there could be domestic criticism of some of this, but it's a bit of a change, or rather a big change from the past.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, go ahead, Rohit.
Yeah, so just on some of these points again, on the diaspora especially, I think what one should also note recently on the diaspora is how the diaspora has begun to become a more active lever in elections abroad, in the sense that and it's more relevant especially in the context of the United Kingdom, where I think the elections, as a lot of us know, just happened, and one of the biggest swings in any community for any party was towards the Conservative Party from Indians, or especially Hindus, and that was something that actually shocked a lot of Labour supporters, because they were more like, whatever Jeremy Corbyn is saying against Kashmir, against and in general a fairly hostile attitude towards Prime Minister Modi. That is more to do with BJP supporters, and obviously most people in the UK, Indians, are not BJP supporters. I think they sort of missed the point that on something like Kashmir, everyone in India is pretty much on board with with the act of the Modi government. I mean, the vast majority of people, and that's something that came as a pretty big shock to them. And you could see that the Conservatives definitely tried to leverage it, and even the BJP, actually, through overseas friends of BJP, etc., were trying to sort of send a message to Labour, at least in the UK, and we won't know how it played out, because obviously even in the recent times, a lot of Labour MPs have been making quite a lot of statements in the House of Commons, House of Lords, etc. But clearly some sort of a message was sent in terms of the fact that Hindus do not take too lightly to what exactly was being done by Jeremy Corbyn on Kashmir. That's one way of leveraging the diaspora. That's not really something like that hasn't really played out in the US for a variety of reasons, which I won't go into here. But again, I mean, for instance, Ro Khanna, who's pretty high in the foreign affairs section of Bernie Sanders' movement and campaign, and who's obviously himself Indian American and a very big critique of the current Indian government, he managed to win fairly easily his primary against California as an open primary system against another Indian American candidate who was a Republican and tried to sort of use this as a lever to question him, but that didn't work out there. So how diaspora works out in different countries is going to be something that is going to be interesting for India, especially in terms of its conflict with Pakistan, because for a variety of reasons, a lot of Muslim politicians in the West from around the world, like your Ilhan Omar or like Ilhan Omar in the US or a few others in the UK. In fact, a lot of Pakistani Labour MPs, Pakistani origin Labour MPs are there. All of them go pretty hard against India on a lot of the issues, like especially Kashmir and relationship with Pakistan. So India really can leverage its diaspora a lot more, and obviously it depends on how the diaspora reacts to it, and that varies from country to country.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So, Ashish, you made a point earlier about leveraging trade as about using trade as a foreign policy lever. Do you want to come in on that point? Because I believe that there's plenty to unpack there, right? So, are we doing enough? What else can we do? And some specifics around that?
Sure. So one of the challenges in the Indian governance structure is because there are different departments, etc. We have probably never leveraged trade as an instrument of foreign policy. I mean, I think foreign policy, like every other department in India, has a very straitjacketed view. Traditionally, the IFS office, the folks who are from the IFS cadre, they run the foreign policy. Trade is a different set of people. If you really see the way the things have evolved since, let's say, last 30 years in the world. I mean, we have had a peak cycle of globalization, and then probably what we are seeing now is like the receding of that cycle, where the elements of nationalism, closed borders, some of that has come into play. Partly it is political in nature, be it the platform on which Trump was elected or Brexit. Partly it is also man-made disasters like what we are seeing right now with the Wuhan virus, for example. But the fact is that borders are more tightly controlled today than they were at any point in the last 30 years. And when the globalization cycle started, we gave a lot of entry to the firms from the West to the Indian market with our own reforms in 91, which of course really helped in expanding the Indian worldview and so on. But the fact is that I mean, we didn't use it as a leverage. We basically, it was more like a one-way traffic, right? And since India was always a labor-dominated economy, we gave a lot of concessions on the flow of capital or flow of goods, but hardly any country opened up the labor market. And with the signing of GATT and then later WTO, I think a lot of things which we've accepted as part of trade and which then influence foreign policy have kind of been overlooked in the last few years, right? So, for example, now oil. I mean, if you're going to run an oil import bill of 120 billion a year, clearly you're dependent on the countries who are going to supply you the oil, and then the way you deal with those countries, whether it's the OPEC bloc or the US, that now has started influencing the local politics as well, the domestic politics as well, right? So I think one of the key examples we saw was during the Kerala floods, where there's a lot of talk of why can't we take aid from someone else to rebuild the state and so on, right? While that's typically not how the country is operated. So I think the trade and people movement then actually gets linked to some of these areas, and we've probably done a little bit on that in terms of, I mean, we've used it in isolated instances. So, for example, we have taken away the most favored nation status of Pakistan. The trade links with Pakistan have been more or less closed. Look at the recent example of Malaysia, where we used the import of palm oil as a leverage to stop them from commenting on our policies. What Rohit alluded to about CAA and some of the issues concerning Indian citizens. I think this needs to be more structured. I think it appears that it is very episodic right now, where we are probably we probably realize that we have a lever. India has the monopsony power in terms of having a large market, but we really haven't actively used it in the foreign policy. So I think that is one thing which we've made a good start, but there's a long way to go there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. especially what you mentioned, right, which is the most favored nation thing that we revoked against Pakistan. That is especially right. So, Rohit, you want to come in at this point and add to what Ashish mentioned?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one aspect of trade where I think foreign policy really plays a big role. That's of course defense, and what basically has happened with the Rafale, I think, in the sense that one of the key things about the Rafale deal really is how it's a big thing for Dassault, and how that's really made France a lot more receptive to India for other reasons also, but that's something that's really made France really receptive to India. And if you look at the last 1 year on what happened on Kashmir, etc., how France has really been standing like a rock with India, especially in the UN Security Council as a veto wielding country. And it's pretty hard to argue that the order for Rafale really had nothing to do with it, apart from, of course, all the other strategic relationships we have with France and the Prime Minister's personal chemistry with the French president. That's something that we could, we really leveraged our value as a market with us being the world's largest arms importer. Another thing really is oil, where we over the last few years really managed to reduce our dependence on Iranian oil by finding alternate sources. And again, that shows in the way we are able to sort of not really take their comments in some way or the other too seriously on issues like the CAA, etc., where both the supreme leader as well as their foreign minister made some comments, and it really helps us that we are a lot less dependent on Iran for petroleum products today than we were, say, even 4-5 years back.
Yeah. Another thing that I want to end this section on is, the government pulling out of the RCEP, right? I know it upset a lot of free market enthusiasts, but definitely it was done to preserve our Indian interests first, right? So, Ashish, you want to talk about that for a bit?
So the RCEP partnership, or the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, it's a regional free trade agreement, or an FTA, which India has been negotiating since 2012. And there was a time in the Indian foreign policy where we thought that FTAs were a driving force behind creating better relationships with the various countries. And we ended up signing a lot of FTAs with Japan, with some of the Southeast Asian countries in 2009, 10, 11. And what has happened is that although the view was that it would be a two-way deal, it would be like a fair equation, the fact is that we are now running a huge trade deficit against all these countries. In fact, we kind of got saved by not signing an FTA with China, which actually was discussed between 2004 and 2008. But even without an FTA, China has a trade surplus of about 65 billion, now reduced to about 55 billion last year. But the fact is that had we actually got an FTA with China, we would have probably completely been dumped with the Chinese goods, even in several sectors. So RCEP was essentially all the ASEAN bloc plus Australia, China, India, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea. So the idea was that these countries will all get together, 16 countries, and make this new trade bloc. It was fairly clear that India would be on the losing side on this due to several reasons. I mean, it's a fact that we aren't competitive in several of the industries. By signing the FTA, we wouldn't have become any more competitive. I mean, some of those rules and regulations, or what impedes Indian industry, like cheap capital or the labor laws, etc., that doesn't really need an FTA to be reformed. That can happen, or should happen, any which way. So, several industries in India, like agriculture, were worried about what's going to happen if you open these markets. So, for example, milk imports. I mean, New Zealand is one of the largest exporters of the milk. What happens when the FTA is signed? So, especially in a foreign policy sense, on the government actually listened to the lobbies internally and decided that India will not sign this. In fact, we have kind of deferred it, and we are still negotiating 3 or 4 key areas. I mean, one area is like rerouting of goods. So, for example, if you already have you may have a duty structure against Chinese goods, but what if the Chinese goods travel via, say, Dubai or Singapore? I mean, what happens then? So some of those issues are still being negotiated. I mean, of course, with the current Wuhan virus situation, some of these things have gone on a back burner. It's like no one's priority right now. But the fact is that we haven't actually got a good fair deal in any of the past bilateral FTAs. We would rather renegotiate those and look at a trade deal with the US eventually and with the UK post Brexit. Rather than being bullied into the RCEP deal. And I think that's again this was as much of a statement of a foreign policy as it was on trade itself.
All right. So moving on to the next segment, I want to cover a few recent developments with some of the key entities across the world. So we'll begin with US first, right? Amit, do you want to talk about what's happened on the Indo-US front recently?
Yeah, I think so. Recently, we have had some very good interactions with the US, especially in the last 6 years. But to some extent, even before that, I think India and US, in some sense, are natural allies in many respects. And I mean, it's been repeated many times that they're the largest and the richest democracies together. And we do share a lot of common interest. And third point that we talked about some time back, where now the fact that the Indian diaspora is now also a big, increasingly important element in US as well. But I think clearly, I mean, we don't have to go into details, but clearly we have a Cold War legacy for multiple reasons, which could be a separate topic altogether. We were aligned a little bit, even though we said we were non-aligned, we were aligned a little bit towards the Soviet camp in the Cold War. And as a result, some of the early US leaders looked at us with suspicion. Of course, that's changed a lot over the last 2-3 decades. And I think the current government, both in the earlier term and this term, have taken the relationship to the next level. I think there are a lot of things that we can work together on, including common challenges, including common opportunities. And there are a few areas of disagreement, and that's fine. I think there's never going to be 100% match between any two nations on all aspects. And there are some things we can agree to disagree on or keep them in a parking orbit. But overall, there are overwhelming set of positives and mutually beneficial areas that we could work on, including trade. And I think while this trade deal wasn't finalized in the last month's trip, that's something that hopefully should get done later part of this year. Of course, we have now a completely different Black Swan event, so that may put some of these things off for a while. But I think there are a lot of things that can be worked together. We can going forward. We'll just see multiple positives coming out of this relationship. So let me pause here. Maybe we can come back to that after Ashish and Rohit have added something here.
And one of the things that it's also interesting to note is the growing influence of Indian Americans, right? So recently as well, Balaji Srinivasan, who's an investor and entrepreneur based in the Valley, was being considered for the role of head of FDA, right? So Amit, you want to talk specifically about that aspects, in terms of tech and entrepreneurship?
Clearly, you're seeing a lot of Indian American success stories in the US over the past few decades, and especially in the last decade, IT sector is now being dominated at the leadership level by Indian Americans, and including immigrants as well as some first generation and second generation Indian Americans as well. And I think that is gradually going to help us in terms of making some kind of a stand. I mean, while these people, and the other thing that is also going to help is our size as a market, right? I mean, I think compared to 10 years back or compared to 20 years back, we are also a much bigger economy. We are now the 5th largest economy and going to get even bigger in the ranking scheme. So that is also going to affect US view and these tech companies' view of India. The other point is there are Indian Americans that are also coming up in the bureaucratic and political sector as well, and that probably not as much as what we see in UK today, but that is also over the next few years we'll see some interesting names coming up there as well. So that could also be a factor going forward.
Yeah. So Ajit Pai, for instance, I mean, he was at the center of.
Yeah, good. I was going to mention his name. I think that's a very good example. He recently accompanied President Trump on his visit here, and he's a great example of what I was just mentioning.
I know we have elections coming up 2020 in the US. Uh, who do you think would be more natural allies? The Democrats or the Republicans? But although, I mean, I would say that they kind of coalesce pretty strongly in a bipartisan way uh, on the foreign policy front, right? Especially with India. But any favorites in terms of who you think as natural allies
I
for
think
India?
I wouldn't pick favorites. I think it's as you said, right? I think it's been usually the Indian policy has been consistent, though we have seen some more changes in typically in the Republican eras in the past. Again, the current president has been good friends with India as well. But I think, I mean, like any mature relationship between two countries should be, it has to get beyond the internal politics of this country. I mean, we never talk about the governments of the two countries when, say, US is dealing with some of its other allies, like say UK over the last 70 years. So I think the relationship really has to get down to that level where these things don't matter, and the diaspora, the institutions, the people to people contact, and the business to business contact. Because ultimately, business to business contact is also a very important lobbying factor, especially in a country like US, which has such a strong business lobby in virtually every sector. I think if those interests are aligned, then it really doesn't matter who's in power.
Yeah, I want to agree with you. But I know Rohit has a contrarian point on this, right? Or sort of a contrarian point on this. Rohit, who would you favor, the Democrats or the Republicans?
No, I don't have a completely contrarian point, and I agree with the broad thrust of what Amit just said, especially in terms of how things have panned out and what should be our intention, right? In the sense that the US has had a pretty bipartisan approach to relationships with a lot of countries, whether it's the UK, Japan, Israel, some of its close allies, which really doesn't change on who's in power. That's obviously something we should all, ideally, if you think that the India-US relationship is important, which I think all of us on this podcast do, that is something we should be aspiring for. But where I would differ from Amit, or not completely differ, but just say that I am not sure how this is going to play out, not just with India, but in terms of a lot more countries. The way the US foreign policy is going to play out, depending on who is in power, is probably going to change, is my opinion, in the sense that US politics, as a lot of us know, is getting increasingly polarized, and this is obviously getting into foreign policy, etc. Starting with one of the big examples of this was the Iran deal, which was a flagship of President Obama, and which was very strongly opposed by Republicans. And a lot of what the Republicans said, in essence, were things that a fair few Democrats had said at various points of time, like, for instance, the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. But that's really not what finally happened in the end, because there was a broad understanding that the Democrats should rally behind President Obama. And that was also seen even in Brexit, where President Obama was more interested in developing a relationship with the EU, and he made this famous statement that you would be at the back of the queue if in the UK when just as the campaign was going on. And obviously that completely changed with President Donald Trump, who, for whatever reason, is a huge Anglophile, and has also some sort of a problem with the EU. Now, obviously, President Trump is a slightly exceptional character from convention in many ways, but some of these attitudes do percolate to both parties. And I mean, you could just see it in what President Trump just did 3 days back when he announced a travel ban and slightly inexplicably, in my opinion, omitted the United Kingdom from the travel ban or the flight ban that he imposed on European flights. And that was very openly and evidently a political decision. That I don't think is something that's going to continue for the UK if a Democrat comes to power. And I think a lot of the things that happened with India are also going to slightly change, especially on some of the more controversial things like, again, Article 370, CA. Well, obviously, if Senator Sanders had become the president, there would have been a sea change, and that I don't think is going to happen with it becoming pretty much clear that Senator Joe Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee, who is more of a conventional or an establishment Democrat. But there will still be some sort of more of a dissonance. Again, as Amit said, how you don't need to agree on everything, but on certain things, especially some of the more controversial things that the Indian government did and would maybe continue to want to do, then we might expect more of at least criticisms, if not anything substantive, from a democratic administration.
On the trade side, like what I was saying earlier, I think US is a perfect candidate where trade can really balance a lot of these ongoing issues, right? So, for example, like if you look at India's foreign trade, we about 330 odd billion in exports. It's about 200 odd billion in of goods exports, 200 odd billion in services. We run a big surplus on services, but we run a deficit on the goods side, and of course, there's a net deficit there. Our our imports on the goods side are on the tune of 520 billion. So let's say they're about 190 billion of deficit last year on goods, but about 80 billion of surplus on the services side. I think US wants to rebalance that. So basically, if we can actually use the goods, if we can move the goods imports to US, we would actually be able to export much more services to the US in lieu. I mean, that's how the view of President Trump has been. He's fairly mercantilist in his own approach, right? So I think India-US relationships can always be anchored on some trade expectations, and some give and take is always possible, given that we always have a need for, I mean, defense is obviously a big area, and then a lot of the offsets can still happen in India, both manufacturing-wise as well as services-wise. A unique relationship where two parties can genuinely benefit from trade. So I think trade in the US context should be really a very important pillar of our foreign policy, irrespective of who wins the election later this year.
Okay, so let's move on to China, right? I know we've had salty relationships with the Chinese, not just now, but forever, right? Rohit, you want to lay out the context, from Doklam to right now Corona, and how Jinping kind of fits into the whole picture?
Yeah. So, Roshan, I think the relationship with China is in some ways the most important relationship for India in the future for a variety of reasons. The first and most obvious being, of course, that we have a huge border with it, and which is still largely sort of unsettled in many places. Obviously, Arunachal Pradesh being the biggest, and of course the fact that China occupies a part of Jammu and Kashmir, which we consider to be our territory. So that's a very obvious flashpoint with China. The other, and I think even more pressing problem for us is, of course, China's open support of Pakistan on various issues, especially in forums like the UN Security Council, where they're a permanent member, and where we obviously don't have a direct access, and we are sort of reliant on various other permanent members deciding to support us or not. And while a lot of them have in the recent past consistently supported us on several issues, you don't know how long that will continue, depending on their own political changes. So that's a clear risk that we face directly. Of course, the biggest thing, really, if you can call it the defining feature of the current Prime Minister's relationship with China, is that he has sort of tried to make a good personal relationship with the Chinese presidency, while at the same time really refusing to give an inch on substantive issues, whether it was Doklam or even the One Belt, One Road initiative, where India was the first country to sort of stay out of it, even when almost all the countries, including US, which was sort of making statements against it, but not really wanting to rock the boat. And it was India that first sort of said it won't join. Doklam, of course, it was literally a battle of wills on a mountain top, and India just didn't back down. And that I think sort of shows how India under the Prime Minister has sort of tried to keep China on, have a good relationship with China, because it's really, you can't not have a good relationship with China at this juncture. It's just too big and powerful, and in our case, close. But at the same time, you really can't compromise on your core interests, because China, especially under Xi, but in general, has shown that it's not really very respectful of compromises, in the sense that a lot of people say President Trump has managed to bully them into giving him a lot of concessions that other presidents weren't getting from the Chinese. And that sort of shows a different mentality. And I think to international relations, more of a zero-sum game. And I think we've sort of been playing that in a reasonable fashion with whatever hands and cards we've been dealt with over the last few years. And one last point on this, of course, the sheer number of tariffs that are now being imposed on Chinese goods over the last few years, again under this government, which not only helps local retailers, but it sort of helps us balance the trade deficit with China in some form.
Yeah, I think let me jump in here. This is Amit. I think, yeah, I agree. I mean, the China relationship is really going to be one of the important relationships for us in the next, I guess I would say 50 years or even longer. I think we are neighbors. We are the two largest countries. And what this government has been able to do is do a very, very interesting and a very good balancing act. Clearly, we can't ignore China. Clearly, we have to face them on certain strategic issues, which we have done quite well. Rohit talked about Doklam or Dolam, whether it's OBOR, whether it's their Pakistan stand, or even indirectly RCEP. So I think there are some areas where we have to take our stand, but at the same time, we cannot forget that both of us are going to be amongst the biggest strategic trading partners in the years and in the decades to come, right? And doing that balancing act is going to be extremely critical. We obviously want Chinese investment in various sectors. Again, there is a strategic element to it. We want the investment in sectors which are not going to affect or compromise any of our strategic priorities. So a good example of that, and this could be another separate discussion altogether, Carrie, would be 5G, the issue of 5G, right? I think that's going to be a classic debate that we're going to have. Do we want cheap technology, or do we want technology that is more homegrown and has technological inputs from players that don't have a very direct, potentially competing relationship with us? So I think that's going to be one of the defining factors of the next few decades, as well as we deal with China, that is technology, whether it's 5G or some of the other newer technologies that are coming up. But I think doing this balancing is going to be extremely tough, and I think this government has done a great job of doing that over the past 6-7 years. We have had a great, of course, led by the Prime Minister, and we have had a great team with both the former foreign minister, the current foreign minister who was a secretary. And we have had, let's remember, we have had two great former ambassadors to China, both Ambassador Gautam Bambawale and Ambassador Vijay Gokhale, who later on was our foreign secretary, who recently retired. They have all done an excellent job of managing it thus far. But it will continue to be a big challenge for us going forward.
Yeah. Wasn't Minister Jaishankar an ambassador to China earlier? Someone can confirm this? Yeah, I think he was. Okay. Amit mentioned this whole balancing act, right? And spoke about how we're going to negotiate this relationship. Ashish, I want to cue you in on, the coronavirus issue that's happened right now, the outbreak, right? Do you see that as a point of negotiation for us? What can India do?
So when the dust settles down on the whole Wuhan virus episode, this will become another flashpoint in the India-China relationship. Most companies which currently have a manufacturing base in China will be looking forward to creating a business continuity plan, or at least a disaster recovery site somewhere else outside of China, right? Because of the issues which have happened to the world economy in the last few days, and they continue to be there at least for the foreseeable future. The most important contenders will be India, some ASEAN nations, potentially Philippines. So China is not going to like that, right? And as Amit already mentioned, The fact is that India and China have to coexist and grow together. I mean, we still have the two most populous countries. There's still a lot of poverty to be eliminated on both the sides. A lot of quality of life issues still persist, right? So there's a long way to go, and I think this rivalry will always be like a co-opetition. We will fight in some cases, and then there could be other elements where we probably collaborate. So the India-China relationship is always going to be one with we have to coexist together. There'll always be co-opetition involved. There will be areas where we fight, and there'll be areas where we have to cooperate. So I think this reality has to be accepted, and I think it's good that while India has given nothing on areas like say the Quad dialogue along with Australia, US, Japan, or not taking the Chinese press propaganda very, on the chin. South China Sea issues, right? Of course, RCEP, Amit alluded to. So I think some of these issues we have done, we've stood our ground. At the same time, when it comes to real, equations around trade, commerce, people movement, cultural exchange, I think we will have to open up and probably integrate a bit more, because the fact is that the two countries will be the focus of global economics for the foreseeable future.
Okay. So let's move on to obviously the most important relationship, one of the most important relationships that India has, that will be with Pakistan, of course, right? So I think most of India-Pakistan relationships have been centered around the fact that India has more to lose than Pakistan. Pakistan will throw mud on our face and expect that India will not retaliate, at least through any mainstream methods, because simply based on that fact, right? So we have more to lose than them. But we've seen probably the biggest deviation in policy and practice on that front over the last few years. Even going back to Modi 1 government, right? So on the national security front, one thing has been extremely clear, that Pakistan cannot escape retribution, right? Swift retribution at that, as was evidenced by the surgical strikes and Balakot and so on, right? So this policy of death by 1,000 cuts is something that we have kind of realized, recognized, and also have been responsive to. And it shows, because, if you look at national security at this point of time, we've definitely enjoyed a period of relative peace. It also is pertinent to kind of think that, we forget how bad things were. You just have to pick up RVS Mani's book on the myth of Hindu terror to understand how things were even as late as 2011, 2012, with the number of terror incidents and so on, right? Yeah. So does anyone want to come in here, Ashish or Rohit, and talk about national security with respect to Pakistan?
Yeah, I can add a few things, Roshan, and then maybe Rohit can come in. See, the relationship with Pakistan has been dehyphenated for a while now. I think last 20 odd years, the world probably doesn't see India and Pakistan together. And I think that's a good thing overall. Having said that, the fact is that, like as MJ Akbar described Pakistan, it's a jelly state, right? It's always going to be there. It is not collapsing. If it collapses, it might be a bigger issue for India actually in terms of the human crisis, what it will unleash and unfold given the long border we share. But the fact is that despite the risk of Pakistan itself being unstable, we have to look at our interests, which includes what do we do with the POK problem, right? So I think this government has obviously changed the narrative through the surgical strikes and then later the Balakot bombing. But will we go all the way in terms of annexing POK, or at least do some political signaling by creating, say, specific seats for POK in the J&K assembly, while people who are on the Indian side can contest, etc. Some of those questions are still open. But unlike China, where I personally see that some level of cooperation has to be there, I think with respect to Pakistan, our strategy has to be to keep them under pressure and and keep increasing the divergence which we have with them now with respect to economics. So so that the market power which India brings in, etc. I think that weans away the traditional Pakistani support in the West towards India purely for economic reasons or trade reasons, etc. But the issue remains. It's probably going to be irrespective of how we feel about the neighbors. The fact is that this will remain the biggest issue for us in the coming decades.
I think that's a great point. That's a great point, because I don't think that countries should even view India and Pakistan on the same plane, and that's something that we've been able to establish very clearly by negotiating from strength and showing our foreign policy sort of the consolidated power, right? Because so RJ, you want to talk about 370 and Kashmir and its implication in particular to the India-Pakistan policy?
So I think now the whole thing of Kashmir obviously is that Pakistan thinks that it has a special. It thinks that Kashmir should belong to it. And under Imran Khan, Pakistan has also become a much more assertive state against India. That was one of the attractions of Imran Khan, which sort of made the army back him over Nawaz Sharif and whatever happened over the last few years, which ended in some army movements against Nawaz Sharif and then Imran Khan coming into power. So that he is very much a person who has serious discomforts with India as a country itself, and obviously he's not taken at all kindly to the way the Prime Minister has or this government has really dealt with Kashmir or any issues on Pakistan. And I think if you look at how this government has dealt with Pakistan, there's clearly a hardening of tone over the last few years as compared to the time when the Prime Minister went to Lahore or Islamabad to celebrate Nawaz Sharif's birthday and things like that, and inviting everybody to his first swearing in. Those days are over, and the change in Pakistan, apart from has clearly played part in that. Imran Khan has, of course, made a lot of what can be called intemperate statements against India at multiple fora, and the government has just ignored him. So I think the current policy of the Indian government really is to just ignore Pakistan while ensuring that it can't cause any actual harm to India, which is obviously only a tactical policy. It can't be a strategic policy because you can't keep ignoring a country with such a large population and nuclear powers right on your doorstep, or with whom you have an active diplomatic issue with. But for the time being, at least, the approach is that we'll just ignore Pakistan and ensure that they're unable to, really create any issues and come out with terror attacks on Indian soil, at least with impunity, which is something they were used to doing not so many years back. The other thing, again, I think what happened yesterday, where the Prime Minister put out this thing on SAARC, or tweet on SAARC nations. It's a very interesting thing that was done because under the current Modi government, India has really tried to move away from SAARC because Pakistan was hampering it, and move either to BIMSTEC or even do a SAARC -1 this thing. But because the virus is a very humanitarian subject, the PM moved on and put the ball in Pakistan's court, knowing fully well that Imran Khan has really no interest in engaging whatsoever with him on such an issue. That really put him in a... it sort of played out exactly, I think, as the Prime Minister wanted, with Pakistan alone putting out a half-hearted tweet acknowledging the offer, while all the other SAARC countries were very enthusiastic about it.
Interesting. So let's move on from national security. I believe that's a podcast in itself, right? So Ashish, you want to come in on aspects of trade with India and Pakistan, speak about MFN being revoked and those aspects specifically?
Yeah. So the India-Pakistan trade really hasn't taken off historically as well. the trade, which the direct trade obviously is now banned after the events of last year. A lot of the trade happens through routing or gets routed via Dubai, basically, right? So I think that's been the historical premise of exchange of goods. Hardly any services trade across the two countries, except maybe at the points of borders, a little bit on transportation, etc. So I don't see trade playing that big a part. In fact, I would actually advocate a very active trade policy from India's side to dump against Pakistani goods, right? So Pakistan, for example, has got about 10 billion of textile exports. I mean, if you were to really put Pakistan economy under pressure, you have to attack the pain points which Pakistan has on some of these areas. And I think textile trade is probably the most interesting one, because India is also a big exporter in that field. Pakistan has got some advantages in terms of the almost no labor laws being there, etc. The whole labor structure being very cheap. But the fact is that we can easily identify what Pakistan exports and then build our capacities against that. So I think trade can be a lever, not in terms of cooperation, but in terms of competition against Pakistan.
Great point. So I think we'll end the podcast with a brief 30-second conclusion from each of you. We'll start with Amit. Amit, you want to go first?
I think I'll just add a couple of points on Pakistan. I think clearly it's a problem that we have to deal with. We can ignore on some issues, but we can't completely ignore it, obviously. And there has to be a no tolerance policy in terms of terrorism or related issues are concerned. On the trade, yes, I think it's a big opportunity, but has never really taken off for all these years. And ultimately, their leadership has to see potential in trade and working with us. But till that time, I think we can ignore and confront if they resort to terrorism or any other problem.
Rohit, you want to go next?
Yeah. So I think overall what we've seen is we started with a pretty clear recalibration of India's foreign policy over the last few years, which started over 3 decades ago, we would say, with the Narasimha Rao government. And I think over the last 1 year with Dr. Jaishankar's tenure as foreign minister, it sort of crystallized into a clear semblance of what can be called a doctrine. And hopefully over the next 1 year or 1.5 years, we can clearly get what those principles are, while what we talked just now were broad themes. I think we are moving towards having a doctrine of foreign policy, and hopefully in a later podcast, maybe 6 to 12 months from now, we would be in a position to better explain that.
Ashish?
Yeah, Roshan. I would only close by saying that I think India has now finally started to assert itself on the foreign policy in the foreign policy realm. Just hope that it just continues, and both on the strategic as well as tactical side, we use the clout which we have as a large economy, a large market, to further our interests rather than getting very dogmatic about how we have traditionally run the foreign policy.
Okay, thanks so much for joining me, guys. This was a great podcast. Got to listen to a lot of interesting perspectives on foreign policy. That was episode 5 of Bharat Varta. Thank you so much for listening in. We're available on iTunes, Anchor.fm, on a bunch of other platforms. Be sure to check us out. Our Twitter handle is @Bharat Varta. So see you soon. Thank you.